My name is Chauntelle Tibbals.
And your current profession?
I'm a sociologist and I'm a visiting scholar at the University of Southern California.
What was your first ever personal exposure to erotic content, sexual, non-scientific stuff?
Well, I was actually just writing about this recently. When I was a kid, I would periodically be looking through, whatever, cable TV, and there would be scrambled porn. And that honestly would probably be like the first. And you could never see anything, but you could just see that like there was enough naked there that you knew something was going on, but you could never really actually tell. So there was that. And then, I started college, my undergrad, right when the internet was really becoming a big deal in 1995. So it was like the era of pop-ups and the big kind of glut where people just started putting porn up on the internet. So there wasn't, streaming or VOD or anything back in those days, but there was a lot of images and galleries and stuff. And I worked at this library and all through my undergrad. And I remember that a lot of the times the patrons of the library would lock up the computers. So they'd freeze up the terminals or whatever, and they'd have to come up to the desk where all of us employees were and say, "Can you please come reset the computer?" Because there was this master password. And I always thought that was just absolutely ludicrous that there would be like 60 windows open across the top of this, and then some sheepish looking medical student like, "Sorry." And then they would just do the same thing over and over again. So there was the little bit of stuff that I randomly saw, like the scrambled kind when I was a kid. I would see now and again stuff like that, but I never actually watched porn until I started, I hate using the term research, but until I started researching it or investigating the industry, I never really watched it. When I was getting my master's degree, I went to Cal State Northridge, and that's right in the middle of the San Fernando Valley. So I started to learn a little bit about adult production and supposedly how harmful it was to society in the sociological studies that I was doing. And I still didn't really watch any porn though, or see any of it. It was only when I actually started really kind of trying to figure out the ways and means of the industry, how the different companies fit together, how the different genres played out, who the big players were, stuff like that, that I started to poke around content some, and even then that was actually fairly minimal. Now I watch it all the time because, things have since changed, and now I do, adult content, like any media, is a reflection of culture, be it the culture as it used to be, as it is currently, or how it might turn out being. And so now I watch porn on a daily basis to see what's out there and sort of the mirror and the reflection of our penchants and preferences and desires as consumers and as humans.
Well, you talked about it a little bit, but talk a little bit more just your academic experience with erotic content when you were at Cal State Northridge, and what you were doing, what kinds of things you were studying, and what that all entailed.
Okay. Well, I didn't actually have any direct content or any direct study with adult production when I was at Cal State Northridge when I was doing my master's. I did all of my doctoral work on adult content, the industry, so I was at the University of Texas then. But when I was at Cal State Northridge, I was studying sociology, and when I was an undergrad, I was pre-med, I was a physiological sciences major, I was very scientific because that's what I thought you were supposed to do. But when I started my master's, I decided I was going to study what I thought was interesting, and I love to watch people. I love to talk to people. I'm really, really nosy, and so I wanted to study human social interaction. And I've always been really fascinated by gender politics and gender issues. I don't know if it's because I grew up with two younger brothers. I have no idea what it is. And then I've also been really interested in sex, not necessarily sex like my own sexuality or necessarily the sexuality of others, but I've always been interested in sex as sort of a commodity or a consumer interest, people's fascination with it, what it compels people to do. I mean, and it's interesting, sex is a lot like religion. It's a lot like money in many respects, that people will do just about anything if that's the thing that motivates them. So when I was at Cal State Northridge, I started to look into the sociology of sex work, feminism, gender politics, different things like that. And in doing that, I started to find a lot of academic research that was about adult content, the adult production industry, and it was really divided. Things were either very, very anti-porn and anti-sex, interestingly, or very pro-porn and very pro-sex. And right off, that really struck me as odd, problematic, and limiting, because nothing, I don't care how good it is or how bad it is or how much you like it or hate it, nothing is all good or all bad. That's just not the way the world works. There's a lot more nuance. Things are a lot grayscale, or a lot more grayscale. But anyway, I started seeing or reading that, you know, porn was either this thing that corrupted humanity, destroyed people's sexualities, took advantage of women. Nobody ever talked about it taking advantage of men, which I found interesting because many arguments could be made for that if you're anti-porn. You know, all of these different things. And then at the same time, I started reading far less material, but there was still that perspective out there that porn was good for expanding your horizons, giving people a medium by which they could be inspired, or they could see something that maybe they might find interesting that they didn't know existed beforehand. But most of that literature was situated in very niche-y porn, a lot of BDSM type of stuff, that sort of thing. You never saw that argument about, you know, mainstream porn from big production companies. So porn was either all bad or some of it was good in this small respect. So I was suspicious of that, but I really I was suspicious of the all or nothing perspective. But at the same time, I really fell into it. I really, you know, I was reading the Linda Lovelace biographies and reading a lot of the Gloria Steinem pieces. And, you know, I went through all of that and was like, oh my gosh. But then one day, I realized that all of this stuff, at least back in the 80s when academics were writing about it, the vast majority of this stuff was being filmed in the San Fernando Valley, which is where I was at the time. And knowing the San Fernando Valley like I did, and knowing Southern California and laws and whatever, it struck me as odd that this really horrific industry that made this terrible product that caused people to, like, it just ruined their souls and had people chained up in basements and all of these whippings and beatings and taking advantage and exploitation, all of these things. And it was happening right there in the San Fernando Valley, like on a street with lights, you know, in a building that turned off and on, perfectly legal industry, people paying taxes, people coming and going, choosing to be there. I mean, I remember having the most naive thought was that how could any of this stuff be happening in any of these, because my family's in construction, all of these buildings have only been built in like the last 50 years. There's no torture chamber. There's no panic room where you could hide some like trafficked individual. And it just didn't make sense to me that supposedly all of the stuff that was happening could be happening right there in the valley. And so I just became intrigued. I mean, it didn't make sense to me, the way things were being described and the way I, being, you know, the person I was and being from Southern California, whatever, that it could be that story. So that's what that was where my curiosity came in. And it seemed like a bigger project than just a master's level one. So when I went on to my PhD program, that's what I started studying.
Great. I definitely want to come back a little later and talk more about how some of the things that took place or take place in the academic environment with respect to porn and sexuality. But before going there, I wanted to ask, or sort of bring out that there's generally this sort of scale of classification of content. There is sexual, erotic, pornographic, and obscene, and there's varying definitions or purposes or intent to read it. From your perspective, what you've seen and studied, how would you classify sort of or delineate those distinctions?
You know, honestly, and I'm not saying this just to sound all like lovey-dovey or spacey or academic and kind of putting the question off, there really are no definitions. There's no distinction between pornographic, obscene, erotic, or just outright boring or silly. Content means different things to different people. It's the same as any text, as any film, as any book. Somebody can read The Catcher in the Rye and be bored to tears, and other people can be inspired. Some people can watch mainstream porn and be horrifically offended, but other people can watch it and think that it's the most amazing thing that's ever been, or yawn and change the channel. So those terms and those words, to attempt to delineate between them, you know, you're dealing with something that's very personal and very individual. And it's interesting to think about that in terms of the content producer themselves. You know, is the content producer trying to create this vision of sexuality or eroticism that compels them, or are they trying to make something that will sell? Both things, I'm sure, happen. They probably happen at the same time. So you could take something that's extremely erotic to one person and then that's obscene to another. So then what's the definition of erotic or obscene when one thing means erotic and obscene to different people? So, I mean, with the scale and the distinction, I mean, I know that there is a line for obscenity, and, you know, as challenging and as difficult as it must be to try and identify things that seem obscene or that are obscene, you know, that line does need to be there. But even that line of obscenity it's not a line, it's more of like a fuzzy barrier at best.
Well, why do you think and I think it's a great response, and I agree a lot with that. At the same time, at least within our culture, it seems like there's a great significance on being able to identify or classify things, particularly as porn has become more socially visible, I should say. Not so much accepted.
Yeah, visible.
At least more visible than it used to be. And now, because of that, you know, there seems to be people who don't have a problem with it being, you know, 100% hardcore, obscene, and whatever. And then there are others that seem to say, well, I'm more into erotic stuff or erotica than I am into porn. Like, so those distinctions are still important. From a psychological perspective, why do you think that plays a role, or what is it?
So why do people seek to define those terms? Well, yes. I think let me start over. I think that in contemporary U.S. culture, but historically throughout just kind of the socio-cultural development of the United States, there are things that we like and things that we're uncomfortable with. You know, like with anything, there are these big tropes that shape any group. We have a need to classify. For whatever reason, we really, as a culture, I think, value an answer, a finite definition. We really, really like those kinds of surveys when you have 5 specific, discrete points that you can pick from. I think that contributes to our comfort. I don't know if I mean, of course it is actually part of how we've developed as a society, but I really think that wanting those definitions, it's a cultural dimension that you can see probably in most things. Another thing, if having a specific answer makes us comfortable as a society, I would say that sex is something that makes us uncomfortable as a society. For whatever reason, we choose not to deal with it. It has to do with our puritanical roots and all kinds of things. I have no idea. I'm not a historian, but we are uncomfortable with sex. We are uncomfortable with our own sexuality. We are uncomfortable with letting other people explore theirs. We're uncomfortable with giving people information to keep themselves healthy or safe because that somehow reflects back on us, or it's a conversation that we don't want to have. So when you think about people talking about adult content or adult-oriented products, regardless of what they look like, they can be the most beautiful, soft-core, whatever, or they can be the most raunchy, hard, who knows. But when people attempt to identify with what they like out of that spectrum, I think that it has more to do with people trying to find a space that they're comfortable with in a sea of discomfort than it has to do with necessarily any one of those terms or definitions. Because it's interesting when you think about what people say they like and then what people actually do. And then there's no way to know this third dimension, but what people are thinking in their heads. I mean, this harks right back to Alfred Kinsey's research. It's how people identify, what people actually do, and what they want in their heads. You could have somebody, oh, I hate porn. Porn's terrible. Who has the biggest porn stash under their bed and is secretly in their head wishing desperately for this one bit of content that they don't have, either because they don't know it exists or because they just don't know where to get it. And so all those dimensions, you put all that together, and then you take a person and they have to try to find a way to identify with one moment on that big scale. It's complicated.
Definitely. Talk a little bit about what your experience is like within the academic community as you pursue postgraduate work related to the adult industry?
Well, it's interesting. So my experience through, I've had a many varied experience in the past 8 to 10 years exploring and interacting with adult content in the adult community. And at the same time, while I was doing that, I was also going through graduate school myself, which is its own little world with its own very specific ways and means. One paper I wrote, it's called Sex Work, Office Work. It's about women who work behind the scenes in the adult production industry and how those women experience a dividend of the stigma that adult performers get. They don't get the same, so being a PA in porn or being a secretary in an adult production office, it's not gonna get you the same stigma or the same askance glances that you do if you're a performer. However, there is, just by proxy of being associated with this industry and with everything that goes with it, there is a dividend of stigma that you get. And it's interesting because I myself experienced that very significantly as I went through graduate school. I went through any number of experiences, be it people being suspicious of me, wondering what was in my past, either what I had done or who I knew. Why would I be interested in this industry, to being completely almost kicked out of my department, like the pariah, because of being interested in it. And it was absolutely fascinating to me. At first it was very difficult to deal with, but then I started thinking about it, and I'm like, if this is what happens to me just because I'm interested in taking a closer, more accurate look at this industry, what possibly happens to people who actually perform the work? If people can't even be curious or realize that there's something sociologically and culturally significant about the adult industry, and instead have to push it away, even academics, I can't even imagine what the people who go through I can't even imagine what the people in the business who perform the actual labor, especially in front of the camera, must go through. So, I mean, I could give you any number of specific examples, but I mean, this is not a therapy session. But suffice it to say that the notion that I went through the process I went through, read the literature that I read, made the connections that I did, and was very, very interested in what I saw to be a very significant population that was very, very marginalized and overlooked. That was not a sufficient answer, and instead it had to be that I used to be an adult performer, or that I had some sort of connection, a friend, a family member, something. I had some sort of invested interest in it, and it was difficult. So when I wrote that paper, as much as academics are supposed to be so objective, they're not. And it was interesting to see what I myself had experienced in a much smaller way, certainly, but to see it happening to people who would work in offices as completely behind the camera employees.
Now, a lot of your work since you completed your doctorate has centered around helping to establish or support the argument for the cultural significance of the content and the industry. Mm-hmm. What is the role that the academic community plays in sort of validating or establishing cultural significance within anything? Not just, it could be the auto industry, it could be the music industry or whatever. Just the general role of academics and how important is that?
Well, and I don't say this as an academic myself, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with this, but it seems to me that for whatever reason, academics are regarded as fact makers. I think it has a little bit to do with the fact that they have such specific, in-depth knowledge, or at least study, about any particular area, and they're also very isolated. To become an academic, it takes a good decade of your life. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears involved. People say it's not an easy process. It's a very humbling process, and it requires quite a bit to get through the whole thing. So if you can run that marathon and you get on the other side, it's like you're in an ivory tower. You're in this very protected, very isolated space yourself. So not only do you presumably know a lot about something, but you're almost untouchable. You create fact. I say that in very heavy air quotes. And so with any industry, be it the auto industry, the drug industry, the adult industry, when academics speak, for whatever reason, people listen. People are supposed to take it seriously. When you're in court and you have a paper in a peer-reviewed academic journal that you can cite, well, gosh darn it, that's fact. And so when you get academics speaking about the adult industry, even if those academics have only ever watched a handful of scenes that might be dated and are completely not representative, even if those academics have only spoken to one or two people who perhaps had bad experiences in the industry or were in the industry decades prior, it's not that content speaks for itself, and it's not that person or those persons' experiences, though very significant, very important, and very interesting, it's not that they are talking, it's that the academic then takes whatever they see and they translate it into this voice of authenticity, which, in many instances is wonderful, but academics are humans too, and they cry and they get pissed off and they're tired and they watch reality television just like everybody else. And when you take somebody who has a subjectivity, like all humans do, and that person's subjectivity maybe includes a perspective, maybe they don't like the auto industry, maybe they don't like the adult industry, maybe they like the auto industry or the adult industry a little too much. When you get that, and then you that person speaks in a factual way, problems happen.
Since you've been so focused on how does society's current attitude towards sexuality impact its view of porn and the significance of porn?
Well, society's current view of sexuality, I think, is very, people are very afraid of sex. People are very uncomfortable with sex for whatever reason, and different people are uncomfortable or afraid in different ways. Some people aren't, obviously, but I would say a lot of people in our culture, maybe if they're not even uncomfortable with sex in their own self, perhaps they're uncomfortable with the sexuality of others. For whatever reason, this has resulted in a space where we don't talk about sex. So as a consequence, you get developing sexual humans. So, teenagers, these are hormone raging little people that they don't get conversations about sex. The sex ed in school is limited, or it's not there at all. And so kids who want to know about sex because it's almost hardwired in their brains, it probably is hardwired in their brains, especially at that moment, they go out looking for answers. And when you have an internet that's completely wide open, or you have something that's unblocked, or you have parents who are busy, or for whatever reason, all of a sudden porn turns into something that it is absolutely not intended for, which is a sexual education tool. Porn is not meant to teach people how to have sex. I have never, minus people who produce instructionals, I have never once in my life seen something that seemed like it was intended to teach people how to have sex, nor have I ever spoken to somebody who's like, oh, I'm gonna make this movie and I'm gonna teach people how to do this. That's not what porn is for. Just like Tom Cruise movies aren't out there to teach you how to be a spy or whatever silly things he does, I don't even know. But that's not what it's for. But because of technology, lack of communication, fear of sex, whatever, we have this crystallization moment where adult has become culturally significant in that respect. It's taken out of context, and that's a bigger problem. That's not a problem with adults. That's a problem with sex education, parenting, any number of things. So that's one way that porn has become very culturally significant. As people also are uncomfortable with sex, perhaps they're uncomfortable with their own sexualities, we don't know how significant adult content is. So there are no statistics. There's you can go to any number of adult trade publications and they can tell you what the biggest renter, seller, VOD, the biggest watched clip on whatever. They can tell you that, but that's an estimate at best. It's probably closer to a guess more than anything, because nobody knows. Nobody will confess to watching porn. Nobody will admit, oh yeah, that was the best movie I saw last year. People will steal porn rather than pay for what they want to see because of the stigma. Perhaps, maybe somebody doesn't want people to find out that they're really into that pegging video. So they're gonna go watch it on a tube site, a piracy-based tube site, rather than pay for the pegging video because they don't want the sale traced back to them or something like that. And so in a way, porn's significance is almost sort of undercut by our discomfort culturally with sex, because we're uncomfortable with sex, therefore we're uncomfortable with porn. So even though porn is massively consumed, we don't know how massively consumed it is. So we can't make an argument for, oh, look, this is actually a big deal. People really like this genre or that genre. So that's a very confusing way in which porn is significant, an unclear way.
And do you think that even though, yes, it is hard to really pin down what the numbers are in terms of consumption and watching, yet it's obvious from the direction that things have been going, both legally through the paid feed teachers and illegally through tube sites and saturation, that there's more content available and there's more traffic at these sites. More people are interacting with it, yet fewer people are sort of talking about it. Is that ever going to change, and why is that?
I hate to fall back on the same answer and say that the reason why you see more adult sites, higher traffic. I mean, porn sites are the most trafficked sites on the internet today. You know, it's not, I mean, I guess it's people Googling things, but if you add them all up, there's more traffic there than there is, you know, helping humanity or stopping hunger or, you know, saving the environment. People are more concerned with porn than they are with any of those other things, which I guess is both good and bad. I mean, it's nice to see where people's interests lie, and who am I to evaluate interests? Whatever. But I think that disconnect isn't going to disappear until the bigger issue is dealt with, and the bigger issue has to do with our cultural, it's not even ambivalence, it's our complete lack of wanting to engage, discuss, deal with sex and sexuality openly. It causes a lot of problems.
How in sort of a real kind of practical sense of what are some real ways that those problems can manifest themselves? You talked a little while ago about sort of porn as sex education, but what other ways are you able to think of, if there are any, where this sort of social discomfort publicly with something that privately seems to be so popular, how does that create problems, or how do those problems manifest themselves in a way that we all might be able to see or recognize?
So many. For example, so I'm trying to figure out a way to put the question back into the statement. So you can see our discomfort with sex as it trickles down into adult production manifest in the real world in endless specific ways. You can see a person who was an adult performer, be it a person who was in 5 scenes or 1 scene, or a person who was a big deal, recognizable adult performer for years, who wants to leave the industry. And then that person doesn't have a work history that they can use, or can't get a job. Or if they do get a job when their work history is identified, then they not only lose their job, but they're completely like dragged through the mud. This happens all the time with teachers. We see this over and over again. There was a teacher recently in Southern California who years prior had been an adult performer, and I don't mean to evaluate her career, but she wasn't that big of a deal of an adult performer. She did a few scenes, you know, whatever. It was 2007, you know, that's here today, gone tomorrow with the way technology is nowadays. But one of her students, this is a junior high school teacher, why was a junior high school student digging through porn? That's a whole separate issue that gets back to other things that we've talked about. But one of her students finds this footage, and now this woman who's done nothing illegal, done nothing, absolutely nothing wrong, who was doing her job, and in fact, you could make the argument that she was really doing a job that most people don't want to do. Junior high school students are beastly creatures. They are out of control. So just teaching junior high, no. Teaching in a public school, the public school system is in a shambles, especially in the state of California. So you have a woman who is fully credentialed, can do her job, taking a job that a lot of people, even a lot of teachers, wouldn't take. And then rather than applaud this woman or support her, she gets fired from her job because a student found something that's not even intended for them. That's a real world example of discomfort. We can't get over the fact that she had this other job and let her go on and do the job that she's now doing, that she's fully qualified for, and that one day everybody was like, yay, teacher, you're great, and the next day she's this whore that has to be fired. That's ludicrous. That's what, that's just a highly publicized case. I can't imagine how many other instances there are of, somebody trying to go get a job at a restaurant as a host or at a bank or something. And it's like, well, where did you work from year 1 to year 2? And it's like, I don't know. That's not the way. The world is very, very competitive, and the economy is very, very bad. To not be able to engage that is really difficult. But you can see it in consumers, so out in the general public, when perhaps you have, 2 partners and one partner wants this, but the other partner doesn't want that, or they're not communicating about their wants. So then somebody goes and starts, oh, well, I'm curious to see that, so I'm going to watch this. And then the problem, the struggle, the difficulty, marriages get broken up over this. And it's not because of, it's not that marriages are all that stable nowadays anyway, whatever. But it's not porn's fault. It's people's lack of, or I don't want to say people's lack of communication. It's not porn's fault that happens. It's our inability to communicate with one another that manifests in that way. So you get a discomfort with sex, you throw porn into the mix, and all of a sudden you see a real life manifestation of that problem.
Well, you mentioned earlier that you were in passing, at least, that you're not a historian, so I won't be looking for specific dates in this response. But
well, I'm a pretty good porn historian. I don't know, when somebody sailed and the laws about this and that. I know the Comstock law, and that's about it.
No, that's fine. What I actually wanted to ask was if you could tell us extreme and this, but what we're dealing with in some of the stuff is no different than what has been seen not just 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago, but 200, 300, 400 years ago as well in different things. Talk a little bit about what you're familiar with in terms of examples of that kind of phenomenon, that kind of content throughout history.
Okay. Well, in the United States at least, and I know erotic content predates the United States by a lot, but in the United States, really and truly, adult content that's being produced, it's no different. It's no different now than it was in the 70s. And honestly, even though technology has changed, so media is different, I don't necessarily think it was that different, pre-1970s. You can look through adult content. You can go through films every single year from the early 70s when, the adult quote-unquote film industry was born, every single year discreetly, and see the exact same things. You can see 3-ways, you can see anal sex, you can see rough sex, whatever that means, because it's completely variable. And in fact, as our world has become more sanitized, there are many instances where adult content has become more sanitized as well. A lot of the language that you can hear in adult content in the 1970s that you can also hear on television shows and you can see in drawn cartoons, decades ago, you would never hear that today, and it's no longer present. But that's how the world has evolved. But in terms of the actual mechanics of the sex, there's an anal sex scene in Deep Throat. That's one of the first big deal adult movies. And people talk about porn as creating like porn has somehow invented anal sex in the past 10 years, and that's not the case. And I would venture to guess that if we were to go back to loops and reels produced in the 50s, in the 40s, because that stuff does exist. It's very hard to see and get a hold of. There are archival copies of that. You will see similar things. You will see similar themes. You will see oh, leave me alone, and oh, let's have sex, or whatever. It's just the technology was different. The distribution models were different. So in terms of the historical development of adult content in the United States, it's definitely dependent on technology, but if you were to control for technology, yeah, there's a lot more of it today, but that's just because a lot more people have access to it, so you have to keep up with the demand. But what's going on in there, in many instances, has always been happening, and in several instances is actually less problematic, and it reflects the diversification and the development of society in very specific ways.
Now, there's an interesting sort of split between the fact that there's so much sort of ubiquity of content and ease of access with, with tablets and wireless mobile devices and high-speed internet, and streaming video. It's the stuff is now everywhere, as folks would say, and everybody's doing it. Everybody's watching it at work all the time, thanks to technology. Yet at the same time, and this is something that you experienced in one of your recent, when you went to view the Revenge of the Teens movie. It doesn't seem to have changed the way that we feel about viewing this in a group setting.
Right.
As much as it's out there, and as much as the technology has made it more accessible, it still seems to be something that's more private or more personal. Do you see technology as having an ability to change that over time? Is it too early? Is it ever going to change?
Well, it's interesting. So when you think about the ubiquity of adult content, I mean, adult content is everywhere, but the hardcore is not necessarily everywhere, or it's not necessarily as long-standing as everything else. So you can go on the internet and find videos of two topless chicks making out, fine. But to get some like actual hard content, it's not difficult, but it requires a little bit more, I don't want to say digging around, but it's just not quite there. And even if it is there, whenever you're finding it and you're viewing it in a sexual way, generally that's sort of a private thing or something that maybe you do with your partner. So when you think about viewing hardcore in a public setting or in groups, I don't know if that will ever change, because that, and that being uncomfortable for people, that might have more to do with how we as humans and as social beings in the society that we've constructed for ourselves, how we engage in sex behavior. Public sex is not something that's part of what we do, and engaging in like group or voyeuristic sex is not necessarily the case either. So back before technology allowed us to view porn privately, even when you had to go to like a pussycat theater kind of place, people sat in those audiences and they engaged that content in a sexual way. But even then, it was still relatively private. I recently had an experience where I went to a premiere of an adult film, and they didn't cut out the hardcore. And I attended with a friend of mine, and we saw another friend there. And it was very uncomfortable to watch a 20-minute sex scene, like with my buddy there kind of thing. Not because I was uncomfortable with the content, but because it was just so long and drawn out. And it's like the only reason why I would be watching this is either I was going to write a review or if I was going to engage it in a sexual way. And I wouldn't engage in sexual conduct around that particular friend of mine. So therefore, I felt kind of like I was in a situation where, there was two behavior norms at odds, hanging out with my friend and then all this porn happening. So I really felt like I should take out my notebook and start writing down stuff for my review. Just kidding. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but I tried.
Well, yes and no. Do you feel that it would seem, I guess, contrary to what a lot of the proponents of porn and of the industry have said, that how so much of this content is eating away at the moral fiber and values of people. Yet, as you just explained, even folks like yourself that have such low moral value that you would even stoop to viewing an adult movie, you still feel uncomfortable, in certain settings when that stuff is going on.
Right. I mean, it's not that. How to explain? It has more to do, when people describe porn as eroding intimacy or sort of degrading sexuality, I think that people are putting their own discomforts off on others, because it depends. I think what you're describing right now has to do with intimacy. And if I am viewing adult content for work purposes, for review purposes, if it's on in the background at a show, if a friend of mine is in something and that person is telling me, look, here's this great job I did right here, then that context is engaging that content as work, as entertainment, as lighthearted, public, fun, whatever. But when none of those things are happening, and then you're left with the sex aspects of it, then you go, well, this is a more intimate thing. Now it's put in this intimate context, and if you are engaging those things in different ways, then you get put at odds. So I don't think, I mean, I can't speak for every single individual, because certainly people have different experiences, but I don't think that porn is eroding people's ability to engage in private behavior or to feel private sentiments, but perhaps the context is what shapes how that porn is experienced. So if somebody, I mean, it has to do also with the conceptualization of erotic, pornographic, obscene. What's an erotic context to me or to you or to another person is it's endlessly variable. So the other people who were in the audience, for example, were laughing and carrying on at that film because it was their project. I was uncomfortable because I was watching it with a friend of mine and it wasn't our project. And so it was a series of circumstances that didn't necessarily match up.
You spoke a little earlier about the sort of birth of the adult film industry in the 70s, and even with the film Deep Throat, when it came out, it was treated in a much different way than most adult releases are at this time. It was a really, really big deal. A lot of people went to view it in the same way that they would go to see a major motion picture at any particular theater these days. Sort of comparatively speaking, is the significance of something like that at that particular time any greater than, from a social sense, that here we have this movie in this public theater that has all of this attention coming to it? Is that any different than the fact that you've got this culture now, these people with all these devices, this sort of overly saturated, readily available, always on, hypersexual environment? Is there any difference between the two? Is one more intense than the other?
Well, I mean, obviously, just because, a Deep Throat came out in 72 or 73, I always forget which one, but Deep Throat came out over 30 years ago. So the world was different then. Technology was different. The culture was different. We were going through a series of cultural shifts. I mean, we're right on the tail of the late 60s, huge developments in civil rights, huge developments in sexual freedom for so many people. You would never see today an adult film, people lining up for it. It wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen for so many reasons. It wouldn't happen because because everybody's saturated because nobody cares. It wouldn't happen because it's not novel anymore. It wouldn't happen because we're not in the same space culturally. It wouldn't happen because the technology is not a big deal. I mean, that was happening right on the cusp. I mean, that was the first talkie adult movie. I mean, there was little short reels that had some sound in them, but that was the first actual movie adult production. It was novel. I mean, maybe if there was like porn in space or something nowadays, people might line up for it. But Deep Throat had a lot of, you know, it was like a great football play or something like that could never be repeated again. It's just, there was a lot of factors that came into play that the stars were perfectly aligned to make it as significant as it was. And it's interesting because when you watch the movie, it's really silly. it's I mean, other movies from that era are, in terms of filmmaking, story, you know, plot development, there's other films right in that same pocket that are so much better, but they just didn't have the first one they didn't have that shtick, that novelty, that circus act, whatever you want to call that. It just didn't happen. So I don't think that, at least not in my imagination, but I mean, I'm not very technologically savvy, so I can't think of some super thing that would come up, but I can't imagine a movie making the same impact, not because the film itself was so revolutionary, but because of the moment that it appeared. That was a revolutionary moment.
Now, within the past 12 years, there's been a lot that has taken place within the industry. You know, at the turn of the century, the industry was sort of just coming online and beginning to grow because of that. But at that particular time, you know, bandwidth wasn't as powerful as it is today. So, you know, there was a lot of talk about how the industry is growing and how the industry is such a big thing, and that continued for, you know, several years, while at the same time the industry was growing because of technology, until it became this sort of bloated, almost oversaturated, unique kind of environment that it is today. Is there anything that, from sort of a perspective of sociology, is there anything that could move things to the next level or to a different level than they already are? Because it seems from my conversations with a lot of the professionals in the industry that because the industry sort of had to change its focus a lot, because it's no longer as much, or it's become harder because of how much content there is available right now.
Right. Well, that's interesting. As you describe, back in the late 90s through the early 2000s, porn was in a glut. One person told me once that back in the early 2000s, you could just throw something at a wall and it would sell. Like, you didn't have to put forth any effort, and that was it. It was just, people just wanted naked, hardcore, motion, awesome. You know, that was it. And there was a tipping point. I think the tipping point was somewhere around about 2005, where enough people got high-speed internet access, enough people realized that shopping online with a credit card is no big deal, where technology and streaming and tubes and all of that stuff, it was like a go, 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 and then there was this apex point, and then it just turned into like a mess, and all of a sudden people were like, why would I buy this? I can get it for free. Why would I pay $12.99 for this when I can get it for $5.95 over here? Why would I pay for it why would I pay for it at all? On and on. And so what I think, you know, because ultimately in the end, regardless of what a producer may intend, regardless of what a performer goes through as a, you know, as a physical artist, whatever it is, porn is still a product. So really what we're now talking about is the consumer relationship. And so I think one thing that's going to happen to turn the next corner is that the adult industry is going to have to reframe its relationship with the consumer, and the consumer is also going to have to reframe its relationship with adult content. A lot of people think that all those tube sites they're just there just for fun, that the porn gods have just put this out there for them to use, to engage, whatever it is that they want to do. Consumers don't know. Sometimes people know, but a lot of the times people honestly don't know any better. And I've had several experiences where I explain to either a person I'm talking to at a show or a reader. I have a lot of interactions with people on my blog. I'm like, no, this performer that you love and adore, what you're doing right now is you're taking their livelihood away. You are limiting the amount of productions that are going to be made. Thus, this person is not going to get work because you are essentially stealing their labor. And people don't understand that. And so that the consumers need to more fully understand what it is that porn is a product that they need to pay for, just like they need to pay for food, gas in their car, whatever. Not to say that those relationships are perfect, but the fact remains is that a service is being provided and therefore it needs to be paid for. At the same time, porn, the adult industry, also needs to reframe how it handles things. So there were many years where the consumer was completely devalued because, you throw porn against a wall, somebody will buy it. So if Joe Schmo over here is tired of whatever, well, there's 50 other Joe Schmoes lined up to buy whatever it is or to get whatever it is that you're selling. So I think that adult production became very lazy in terms of customer service, basic customer service, updating websites regularly, giving consumers multiple options with how to purchase things. People don't buy whole CDs anymore. Why would they buy a month worth of content? Or why wouldn't you give them the option to purchase things in a more familiar manner, one-off, or the affiliate model? Some people like both. Not manipulating the consumer, so not blasting them with spam or blasting them with pop-ups or making it impossible for them to cancel their subscriptions or billing them from suspicious looking billing addresses or whatever. All of those things need to be reframed. So it's like a two-way street where we kind of painted ourselves into a corner. There was this heyday of the late 90s, early 2000s where everybody wanted porn. It was still kind of a hot commodity, and it's like, woo, porn all over the place. But it's since changed, and we have to figure out, as a culture, as producers, as consumers, how to get ourselves out of that corner that we've backed ourselves into and reshape what it is that we're doing.
I want to ask you about this sort of culture of greed that has been more visible. I don't know if it's always been around, but it seems that it's been more visible in recent years, but it's been handled differently with different industries. There was the music industry and the Napster issue, and that was a big deal in terms of performers not being able to get paid for their music. And it seems as though, for better or for worse, Apple and iTunes created a model that works. It's been copied by certain places like Amazon. But for the most part, it doesn't seem like people have an issue with purchasing the music that they want, utilizing these services. They still believe in supporting the performer because insert name of artist here is my favorite band, so I want to buy their music, I want to go to their show, I want to do it. Right. At the same time, you've seen the similar sorts of things happening with the tube sites, but as you mentioned, that connection hasn't been made in terms of saying, this performer that I love so much is a professional and they're not being compensated when I take it. What is it about us that at one side we want to get everything free, but on the other side we want people to patronize and support us when we put our work out?
In the context of porn specifically, in terms of, you know, I want everything for free, but at the same time, please buy my stuff. It's an interesting conundrum. I don't think that porn fans, like people who are really, truly devoted fans, fit into this description, because I think porn fans, still support their favorite girl. They still buy their stuff. You know, they're still there. But the vast majority of people, for whatever reason, think that porn is free and whatever. I think there's a lot of reasons why this still is. I think that porn is not respected, first and foremost. And, you know, you can go to any, I don't know, I always think of Metallica when I think of this, because I remember that, you know, that big artist, they were very significant in pushing, you know, through the music industry, getting things licensed, people have to pay, got rid of Napster, et cetera, et cetera. But people don't look at adult performers or adult producers as artists or as skilled laborers. It is mind-boggling to me the amount of times I have heard a man person say, oh yeah, I could be a porn star. Or you see people who are just starting out as performers and they don't know the mechanics of how to do the work. Because porn performance requires a lot of skill. And to make a good adult film, you can't just shoot it in whatever. I mean, there are angles, there are lights, there are this, there are that. There are key directors within adult content production and key producers that do a better job than others. You know, it is skilled labor. But I don't think that the vast majority of consumers realize how much skill truly goes into developing that product. So if you have a product that you don't necessarily, I mean, you can hear some awesome shredding guitarist and go, oh, that's skill. But you see somebody having sex or holding what looks like a camcorder to you and talking to the performers, that doesn't resonate as skill. And this again speaks to the disconnect between the bigger culture and the subculture of adult. The two don't match up. There's a lot of stuff that happens in porn that the wider society doesn't understand. So we have that devaluation of the product. There's also, you know, the way the pay scale and the way payment is structured, I think contributes to that as well. Because although there are some performers that do own their content, the vast majority of performers are paid like contract laborers, so they're one-offed. So they make their money for doing their work on a particular project, and then, you know, then they go on with their day and their life and whatever. And so all of a sudden, it's easier to steal from that performer. So, oh, I can go onto whatever tube site and watch my favorite performer for free, because I know that she already got paid for that site. What I'm really doing is stealing from the company. If consumers even understand that relationship at that level, and I mean, I don't mean it like porn consumers don't understand stuff. That's a pretty complicated production relationship. So, you know, you get people who are then not the artists responsible for taking down Napster. You're not gonna get the porn performers out there, you know, hammering to take down a tube site, because they've already been paid for their work. And it's the ones that own their content that are really, they're really vocal about making sure that, you know, the work that they put in is compensated for. So there's a lot of structure, and then there's a lot of disconnect between, you know, what people value and the value that's put on that type of labor. I would love to see a lot of people go to a porn set and sit there 12-hour day, covered in makeup, trying to have sex under hot lights for however many hours, and see how skilled they think the labor is. Just saying. It's funny to me.
I'm with you on that one. A lot of your work and your focus and interest is on the cultural significance of the industry. From what you've done, what you've seen, what would you say is that significance of porn in the industry?
Oh, I mean, I guess if you were to take porn as a whole and the industry as a whole, you could say the significance is that human beings and human society, at least now in the United States and in the recent past, are really, really interested in sex. Because, again, it's a for-profit industry. People aren't philanthropically creating adult content to give it away as some sort of benevolent endeavor. So for people to keep creating it, there has to be somebody picking it up. So as a whole, porn speaks to our interest, our fascination in sex, in bodies, in connections, in doing different things, in pushing boundaries in different ways, that sort of thing. If you look at particular genres, or if you look at particular captures of content, you can see any number of things. You can look at adult content from the 1980s. And yeah, there are the blends at the decades from the 70s and the 90s, but you can look at something that was made in 1985 and go, that's some mid-80s porn right there. Because you can see an image, you can see a reflection of society, be it in hair, be it in themes. I mean, you're not gonna see Miami Spice, the Miami Vice knockoff porn franchise develop today, because that's not what we have. But instead, people are already casting 50 Shades of Grayer. People are already casting the cultural phenomena that are happening currently. And so you're gonna see those things. So in, more bigger budget feature productions, you can see the sort of themes in popular culture. You can see jokes, news issues. I mean, from Tiger Woods to Sarah Palin to you name it, there's a porn parody about it nowadays, because parodies are the thing that's popular. But hey, guess what? Mainstream Hollywood, parodies are the thing that's popular there too. So they're operating in conjunction. So porn is showing us what's happening in popular culture. They're showing us a lot of things too, things that we don't necessarily want to see. People complain about, the women performers in adult are always so young, or they look so young, or they're infantilized in ways. So you see women who have on little skirts and pigtails. Well, hey, guess what, wider society? We do that too. There are 14-year-old models modeling highly expensive clothing on catwalks all over the world. That's not that far removed from that. We love youth. We love particular aesthetics. And so sometimes people point the finger at porn saying, oh, there's all of this problematic imagery. But I don't think that any of that problematic imagery is far removed. I don't think that any of that, I can't say that sentence that I'm about to say. I don't think that any of that problematic imagery is that far removed from other problematic imagery that we see in any number of mainstream industries or cultural artifacts. So that's its significance.
The modern adult industry is quite diverse in its composition and its function.
Yes.
Behind the camera and in front of the camera.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that diversity, how it manifests itself, and what the significance is of such a diverse industry that it's still marginalized.
Well, I mean, porn is, for whatever reason, the last space that we as a society think that it's okay to marginalize. It is okay to cancel an adult performer's bank account because she works, that's a true story, because she works in porn. It's okay to fire somebody, on and on. But the interesting thing to think about is the variety of content, of individuals, of production houses, levels. Porn is it's an almost perfect subculture. And the reason why, or one reason why I think people are so uncomfortable with that, is because when you see something in a microcosm form like that, you start to see reflections of wider society that can make you uncomfortable. So in the adult production industry, there are a handful of big players. Oh, there's a handful of people controlling adult content production. Well, there's a handful of people who control the United States. But when you put it on that small level, several thousand people in porn, well, that's more of a relationship that you can deal with. There is a vast array of different types of content, different performers. So there are performers into their 70s, and there are performers that turned 18 the day that they shoot their first scene. So there's all kinds of people. There are all kinds of body types, ethnicities, genres, on and on. However, within the context of that diversity, certain things sell more. Certain performers are more popular. And that, you might go, oh, porn, it's reflecting it's marginalizing, or it's fetishizing, or it's commodifying a particular thing. But really and truly, that's just a small scale reflection of wider social values. It's a very, very uncomfortable thing to think about. But porn does not operate in a vacuum. You think about the people who work behind the scenes. A lot of people who work in adult hustle themselves out. They work on this set, they work on that set, they PA for one set, they cater for the next, they do makeup on a third. I've come across many, many people. It's like, this is the most Renaissance person I've ever met in my life, because they can do all of these jobs. And you might go, oh, that's terrible, working all of those different things, and working contract by contract, and running around, and no place to work full time, and et cetera, et cetera. Except that's the way the work world is in many respects nowadays. So it's easy for us to go, oh, it's so sad what's happening in porn, or it's so terrible what's going on in porn, if people even think about porn on that level, which that doesn't seem to happen very often. But a lot of it is just a smaller scale version of what's happening in the whole culture. And I'm sure that it's happening in any creative industry. You could see similar things. Porn's not unique in that respect.
Now, one of the things that has happened via technology is that it's placed the power to create content and distribute content, particularly sexual content, into the hands of the average citizen. And sort of acceptance, because more people can do it. Has that had any impact on it, or is it still pretty much the same thing regardless?
Well, I think that because a lot of people, as technology has developed and changed, there's a lot more opportunity to create adult content, and you do see a lot more people. You see, especially in more niche genres, you see a lot of people where you used to have some big powerhouse production companies. Now there's a lot of smaller places, and there's a lot more varied spaces. So you see you see a lot of queer porn production, for example, that didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago. And that you get to see a lot of different bodies, a lot of different body types, a lot of different storylines, themes, or you get to see the same exact stuff just with different people in it. I mean, there's all kinds of variety. In terms of amateur porn, in terms of, and amateur is a very, kind of a loaded term, because, you could have an amateur looking shoot, but it's done professionally, or you could have people, whatever. The webcamming options, like all of that stuff, there are so many more opportunities for people to make money in adult production. But at the same time, because there's so many more opportunities for people to do it now, then all of a sudden the pond has gotten bigger. There's a lot more people in there. So if maybe you had the capacity to webcam 10 years ago, but you were the only one with that technology, you might be crushing it. But nowadays, you have that technology and you have that opportunity, or one has that technology and one has that opportunity, but so does everybody else. So it might be, and I know that it is in many respects, that consumers get their needs more specifically met because they can find the exact thing that they want, themed in a particular way. There's a lot more interaction, but there's also a lot more to choose from.
The other industry, but not necessarily in the industry. They may not be a producer, they may not be a performer, or they may not work in a studio, but they blog about issues that are of significance to the industry, or they review content in the industry. Talk a little bit about how this sort of culture has spread out and what's going on there.
Do you mean like adult blog? You're talking about like pop porn or like Hot Wife blog or like that kind of stuff?
Yeah, just the fact that, for the most part, prior to this sort of growth and burst of the internet, the adult stuff seemed to be centered around A, the people that made the content, either filming or producing or starring in it, B, the people that distributed the content, and then finally the folks that actually sold it. That seemed to be where all of the real discussion was going on.
I see.
But, now there are sites that are devoted to reviewing things. There are, people that write stories that are, whether they be gossip stories or whether they're just, actual factual news stories, even to the things that you're doing through PBV. There's more of that kind of stuff happening now that caters to people that are interested in the industry.
Okay. So it seems like as technology has changed and let me think about this for a second. So it seems to me that in the past few years, consumers in general have really changed the way that they like to interact with different spaces. We have sites where people can review their local coffee shop and at the same time talk about the biggest blockbuster movie that they just saw. And then you can take individuals and they can develop their own online personalities or spaces where people can go and get sort of a more human perspective on things. Prior to blogging and the ease of website development and social media, porn really was talked about, known about, controlled by key players. But now, just like any other space, you see a lot more people interacting with it on a more personal level. So you see real life people giving reviews about content or picking things, and then they develop personalities themselves. So you can look at an adult review site, for example, that has maybe 10 people writing for it. And over time, if you want to get involved in that community, you can start to see, reviewer number X, reviewer X. Really, I have a lot in common with this person. They seem to like something similar. I can interact with this person and I can get a second opinion, basically, without necessarily going out and doing it myself. And you really see this whole new tier of, I don't want to call it adult social media. It's not adult reporting, but it's just a new dimension in the adult community where you see people interacting with adult content and the adult industry as a cultural space. You also see this with music, with film, with shoes. I mean, with anything, it's there, and it's with adults as well. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, and, definitely, and I think that is interesting because it seems that this also led to this sort of cross-pollination of what you find in the adult world and what we find in the mainstream world. Kelly Holland spoke about this when we interviewed her, about how there at one point was this line between, late night content and pornography. And thanks to like HBO and Showtime, she says that line is no longer a line. It's like a highway, and everyone sort of skirts back and forth across it.
Right.
And those kind of things, it seems to me, have been made possible by the fact that you got more people just talking about it, more people experiencing it, whether it's their blog, whether it's an internet radio show, or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just another example of cultural shifts we've seen in general, though. I mean, people, I remember I went and saw, what movie did I go see yesterday? I can't even remember the title of it. Oh, The Dictator. And the movie just came out, and there were 20 people in the movie theater. And yeah, it was like early evening, but you can remember a time when movies would play for weeks or months at a time, and now, you don't even have to bother going to see it. You can see a review immediately with screen grabs and captures and get a general idea of whether or not you even want to spend that much money or time, or you don't want to buy a cable subscription, so you just one-off your particular show that you want to see. And people have a different way of interacting with media in general. And so as that different way of interacting with media, also happens with adult as it is, then you start to see different things. You see, I mean, there are websites where they will somehow randomly happen to mainstream websites where they will pick up a bit of adult content, or a story where a mainstream celebrity or personality crosses over and interacts with the adult industry in some way. And you see those moments where those channels are sort of open, and they're not really open because it's done for novelty, or like, oh, it was kind of tepid water sort of thing. But it is interesting how you see that now.
I have two final questions.
Okay. Can I grab some water real quick? I'm choking. I'll be right back. 1 second. Sorry.
No worries.
I'll squeeze back. Ugh. All my talking. So much talking. Are you like bored to tears?
No, that's not.
Okay. Sorry.
No problem.
Oh my goodness.
So the first question that I wanted to ask is related to the phenomenon of the adult megastar, the Jenna Jameson, Ron Jeremy. Many people have maintained that point in time is kind of over. The ability for somebody to sort of build such a career and following an adult that can then either translate, as it did in Jenna's case, to some huge sort of numbers, or in Ron's case, sort of a huge degree of longevity and publicity and notoriety. It doesn't seem to have gone as well for a few more recent examples. I think of Sasha Grey, and even though she did have those appearances in mainstream features, if she tries to do something at a school, and that still creates a bit of an issue.
I don't think Jenna could do anything at a school either, though. I don't think Jenna could do anything at a school either, though.
No, and that's the same thing. I'm just wondering, is there anybody that could sort of, or is it possible that anyone could get to that sort of level of notoriety again? Maybe not with.
Okay, so I guess in many respects, the idea of the death of the porn star, or the fact that perhaps we will not ever see those adult megastars like we used to, that is talked about quite a bit. You can think about the ones who maybe are commonly cited examples in those respects. So your Jenna Jamesons, your Ron Jeremys, be they megastar or very, very long career, very significant cultural iconography. And you can think about them like Deep Throat. Jenna Jameson came along, she was in the right place at the right time, she had the right look, and she had the right people in her corner. that could be the case. That could be just like Deep Throat. Or it could be that, and it could be that that's gone, that that's not going to happen anymore. People are over porn performers. I personally don't think that that's the case. I think that Jenna Jameson was a significant phenomenon. She herself was significant, right place, right time, right people behind her, you know. But just because that hasn't happened since, I don't think that that doesn't mean it can't happen again. The example people often talk about is Sasha Grey. Sasha Grey was a very, very big deal, and then she attempted to cross over mainstream, and where has she really gone? Well, this is no knock against Jenna Jameson's development, but where has Jenna Jameson really gone? I mean, both of them, if you take a little bit of distance in terms of years, you know, I don't know either of those women. Much love and luck to both of them, but where their careers don't seem to have gone that differently to me. You know, Jenna had very much mainstream success in terms of her book, Howard Stern. She was in some, you know, she was in some zombie movie. Sasha Grey was in some music videos. She was this, she was that. Ultimately, in the end, you know, if Sasha Grey goes to an elementary school to read books to kids, be it because she really was benevolent and wanted to help, or because it was a publicity stunt, or because it was something else that we don't know about, I think that if Jenna Jameson now, who is the mother of twins, and I don't think that she's married, but has a pretty, you know, mainstreamy kind of life, I think that if she went to an elementary school with TMZ cameras, there'd be just as much hullabaloo about it. So I don't think that they're that different. In terms of there being another performer who's going to make a mainstream splash, well, look at James Dean right now. For whatever reason, some mainstream news channel decided that they were going to talk about this boy next door looking individual who is in the cutest of all cute adult movies, but who simultaneously stars in some of the hardest of the hard. You know, James Dean has a very varied performance career. And I tell you now, I see James Dean's tweets captured all over the internet, and people are talking about this nice Jewish boy with this cute scrubbed face. And oh my gosh, is he dangerous, or is he a novelty? The next one could be James Dean. We don't know. You can't predict the future. There are moments where, for whatever reason, the stars align for people, and that could happen. James Dean could be the next Ron Jeremy, or he could be the next Jenna Jameson. We don't know. And I mean, as the structure of the industry has changed, as it drifts away from, you know, the contract girl and the big studio production, because Jenna was a contract girl, she had a studio behind her, she had all of that stuff. Well, maybe the Jenna Jameson phenomenon exactly isn't going to happen again, but the industry and the world aren't structured in the same way. So you can't, history is not going to repeat itself exactly. But the idea of having a big deal celebrity, an adult, or some place, or some space, or some individual that pierces the mainstream consciousness, I mean, my money's on James Dean as the next one, honestly. But you never know. And it's interesting, too, to think about some of the performers, especially, you know, more women performers come to mind, but that have purposely, you know, now we're definitely past the days of the contract girl. There are only a couple companies that still have them. But, you know, 5 years ago we weren't. And you see some performers who very actively seem to have chosen to not go on the contract route, rather to cultivate their own career. So you see somebody like Dana Diarmond, who has this very, very long-term career. She was the queen of MySpace, and now she's, you know, she is who she is. She has kind of a slow burn. She's not some big epic porn star, but she's got a long career and a huge following, and she doesn't seem to be slowing down, and that's because she manages her own space. So maybe that's the type of thing that's happening now, and it's just a matter of time before one of those women, you know, some people thought it was going to be Alexis Texas or Brie Olson. Who knows? But I mean, the point is that I don't think that it's gone. I just think it's going to happen in a different way.
The feminist movement has at times been both supportive and critical of the industry. What are what are the arguments on both sides, and then what are your own personal views on the subject?
Well, the feminist movement over the course of decades, I mean, to say the feminist movement is to pretend that there's one type of feminism, which there is not, okay? So, but within the context of feminism, there's been a lot of different factions that have either, supported or been very, very critical of porn. Generally, the people who are critical of porn are critical of all of it, like all of it's bad. Nowadays, you will get people who say porn is bad, except for maybe a couple of queer porn or more artistic porn, then that's okay. But then that gets into the sort of historical contextualization of different sorts of feminists who have been supportive of porn. I don't think that there's ever been any group that's gone, porn is awesome, hands down across the board. Even within the context of feminism, when feminists were supporting porn, it was just sorts of porn, types of porn, niches of porn, different dimensions. There was always like a critical umbrella, and then there were a couple spaces that were kind of okay. So really, when you add all that up, what you get overall is that people are generally critical of porn, but some porn is okay. I don't know. I think that really, I myself personally, think that what people are more critical of than porn is for-profit industries, perhaps capitalism, perhaps the commodification of sex, perhaps the notion that different people like different types of sex. I watch porn every single day. As I said, I don't like all of it. I like some of it more than others. Some of it I find extremely offensive. Some of it I find delightful. Like, I'm so happy I watched this because it's the cutest thing I've ever seen. But that's just me, There's no way to say that a whole industry is good or bad. I can't even say that, and I'm just one person with my own experience or views. So, in terms of what people are going to say next or what's going to happen next, I think that people will continue to critique porn mostly, support porn in some respects, and be somewhat conflicted about it until we get at bigger issues that we have, until we figure out ways to understand that some people can have sex and then they can have sex for work. And those things don't mean the same thing, and they don't have to. That's not what you as an individual have to be concerned with, unless you want to be concerned with it. But you don't get to put a finite value on the product that's being sold or the content that's being created in the adult industry. If you don't like it, don't watch it. But don't attempt to tell another person that their experience or their feelings about something is wrong. And when that person changes their mind, that's okay too. People who work in adult today may not tomorrow, or vice versa. Everything is a process and a progressive journey, really. And so, and how I feel about it particularly or specifically, I mean, I think it's a fascinating science project that I feel very lucky that I get to observe. I feel very lucky that I get to talk to the people I get to talk to, know the things that I know, and be around people who are willing to take the brunt of a lot of stigma, discrimination, marginalization, maybe because they're committed to some greater good, or maybe they just want to make a buck and not work a 9-to-5 job. who am I to judge people's motivations?
My absolute last question. In what ways can porn in the industry answer things that I already was going to ask you later on? So this has been very good. I thank you for putting up with. The question has to do with the relationship between porn, both the content and the industry, and contributing to this sort of discourse on sexuality. Throughout many of your answers today, you mentioned how what we're seeing is a side effect or a symptom of our discomfort or our own personal issues that there may be with sex. What ways can the industry and the content of the industry contribute to this discussion? And is it the industry's place to even do that or think of doing something like that?
I personally, when I think about what the adult industry can do and what the adult industry should do to contribute to wider society's discomfort with sex, with bigger issues in terms of consumption, commodification, et cetera. When I think about those things, I personally am a little torn. Part of me thinks that, why is it the adult industry's responsibility to make sure the world is, or U.S. society starts to feel better about sex or works through their issues with sex? But at the same time, then I remember, or I think that the adult industry, simply by existing, forces us to at least be needled by our discomfort with sex. If people didn't have porn to remind them about sex or over there as this pricking little interesting thing, or if porn wasn't there to maybe push boundaries or start a conversation, even if the conversation isn't theirs to start, or even if the conversation is completely unintended, it serves as fodder to remind us that we need to deal with these issues. If there was no porn, then perhaps nobody would think twice about the fact that kids don't get very good sex education nowadays and instead are getting it from this fantasy media. If there was no porn there, then they would just be sitting there in the dark and nobody would have to call attention to that. If there weren't women and men who were performers at one point in time and then later on got fired or went through terrible experiences because of their work histories, if that didn't happen, then perhaps people wouldn't think about discrimination about sexual expression, or perhaps those things wouldn't even come up in conversation. If porn wasn't there, we would miss out on a lot of opportunities for change. It doesn't mean that we as a culture capitalize on every opportunity, but just by simply being there, porn brings up this conversation and brings up this wider issue that we have, which is a discomfort with sex and a discomfort with what other people choose to do in their personal lives or with their bodies. And I think that's hugely significant. So I often feel very thankful in a way that the people who still choose to struggle with what happens to a person as a result of being affiliated with the adult industry or with adult production, I feel very thankful in many instances that there are still people there who are willing to take all of that on just to give us as a culture the opportunity to make change or create change or do something rather than just riding the same status quo. The adult industry has taken many opportunities and taken it upon themselves in many instances to try and protect kids online, for example, to try and stop the sexual exploitation of minors. Those things still happen. Just because it doesn't have anything to do with adult production or with the professional industry does not mean that all of those terrible things aren't out there in the world. But the adult industry has taken it upon itself in many instances to try and actually step in and do something. Are they perfect? Are the solutions perfect? No. Do they step in every single instance when they should? Does the adult industry go, oh man, there's a lot of problematic race, gender, body image, whatever stuff that we're engaging in right now? We should stop that, and we should instead change our production format and force the consumer to deal with their issues. No, they don't do that. But I don't know if that's necessarily their responsibility. When they do that, it's wonderful. Just like when, a mainstream clothing company does something like that, it's also wonderful. But I think what people expect from porn is kind of a leveling correction when porn's not the problem, and nobody can correct everything. Everything needs to be sort of worked at in drops or in inches, and it's a process, so.